Thank you for joining me today on our webinar, Choose to be a Leader Others Would Want to Follow. Before we go into what we're going to be covering today, I want to just take a few moments to get better acquainted and formally introduce myself. And so my name is Johanna Pagonis, and I am the owner of Sinogap Solutions, which is a leadership consulting firm. I have 20 years of experience in leadership, various leadership positions, and also in organizational design and learning and development. My company, actually what we do, although we've worked with organizations from small to big in various industries, what we really do specialize is working with small to medium-sized businesses that have grown rapidly over the last few years and have found themselves in the position to promote some of their technically skilled employees into formal leadership and managerial positions. And what they find is that these individuals who are really technically skilled do struggle a little bit in figuring out how to do their job and achieve organizational goals while still inspiring and motivating a group of people that are now reporting to them to also complete tasks and projects successfully. And so what we do is we work in partnership with the organizations to design employee engagement and leadership strategies that will really help the organization become more resilient and agile and increase employee engagement. And when employees are engaged, not just satisfied and going to work for a paycheck, but really actually are passionate about what they do and understand how what they do aligns to the organization's purpose, we find that they're more productive, they collaborate better, and therefore are more efficient and effective at completing tasks and projects. And so that's some of the things that we do when we work with other companies and organizations. So what about you? It's your turn. What I'd like to hear from you is, what are you hoping to get out of today's webinar? So when you got the notice, Choose to be a Leader Others Would Want to Follow, and you signed up for it, what are some of the things that you're hoping to get out of it? So take a moment to think about it. And then when you're ready, if you can please respond in the group chat. And so I'll give you a hint. Today will be quite interactive in the sense where I'll be prompting you to think and to share your thoughts, ideas, perspectives through the group chat. So if you can just take a moment and type in what are some of the things you're hoping to get out of today's webinar. Although my webinar is designed, I can still personalize certain aspects of it depending on what you share with me today. And if there is something that you would like to get out of today that isn't really within the scope, we can always connect afterwards and engage in a conversation too. So I'll give you a few more minutes to just continue to type into the chat what are some of the things that you're hoping to learn. And I'll take a sip of my water. Okay, so Andrea said, working primarily remotely, developing leadership as part of implementing a new health and safety management system. Okay, today we are going to be focusing on how to develop leadership skills within a workplace, primarily for managers, but really the strategies that I'll be sharing with you can be implemented, can be applied to anybody in any position. Thank you for sharing, Andrea. I'll wait and see if there's anybody else perhaps who's just still typing away. Sue said, being a leader of highly competent staff, absolutely. Yes, because I think that's when you know you're a really good leader, when you can lead a group of people that are highly engaged, can take initiative, are passionate about what they do, can collaborate. You feel like you've successfully led your team. Absolutely. And Andrea said, strategies for myself as a leader without a title. Wonderful. And strategies to support new supervisors within our organization. So for informal, right? Formal, meaning you have a formal leadership position, and informal that you have to have influence and still inspire others to act, but without the title, which could be a bit more challenging too. So I think this will be very applicable to all of you. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's actually go into what we will be talking about today. One of the things I wanted to mention is, and I'm just going to type this into the group chat because I think we have probably everybody who was going to join would have joined, but I'll put this in the group chat a little later. There is an accompanying handout today. You can click on that link. It'll direct you to my website where you can get today's PowerPoint and the handout that comes with it. If you have a moment, please click on the link and at least download the handout, because there's spaces in there where you can actually take notes, and I'll be encouraging you to think about a strategy, a workplace learning strategy you can implement within your workplace to support the development of leadership competency. So if you can, print that out. And if not, get a piece of paper and a pen handy, because I will be encouraging you to capture some of the things that we're talking about today. So as I mentioned, it'll be quite interactive. And as you know, a lot of you are maximizing the group chat, so that's great. There's also a Q&A box that you can click on in your toggle bar. And I encourage you to ask me questions throughout. I'll make some time halfway through to see if there's a couple questions I can answer, but definitely there'll be time at the end that I can answer any of the questions you may have. So please feel free to do that too. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? So what are our points of discussion? We are going to look at what do managers learn in the workplace. So in order to support managerial and leadership development, we have to understand what it is that managers actually learn through everyday work. We're going to look at how that actually happens. How do managers acquire those knowledge and skills and competencies to become strong, capable, and confident leaders? Thank you, Susan. Yeah, strategies to help encourage others, leadership in both formal and informal roles. Wonderful. So we will be covering that. Absolutely. We're also going to look at the barriers and enablers that exist in the workplace that can either inhibit or enable learning to occur. And we'll discuss ways to try and remove some of those barriers by maximizing the enablers. And at the end, I'm going to give you some key strategies, which come from my book, Choose to Be a Leader Others Would Want to Follow, to help you implement some of these workplace learning strategies within your context as well. So that's the goal of this, is for you to walk away with some kind of a strategy or the beginning or budding of a strategy that you can quickly implement or begin to develop into something that's a bit more robust. So to break the ice a little bit more, I wanted to start off with a bit of a personal story as to why I decided to start Sinogap Solutions and why I decided to write this book. And so when I became a manager, early in my early experiences as a manager, there wasn't a lot of support in teaching me how to do the job. I was a technically skilled employee. I was an instructional designer. I felt very confident in what I was doing. But when I became a manager, I really felt like I was in a sink or swim situation. And I remember distinctly one experience that I had where I walked in on my first day into the new office. Nobody knew who I was. Nobody knew I was coming. There was no office. They had to find one at the last minute. There was no keyboard. I had a computer monitor, but I had no keyboard. And I had 7 people reporting to me, and I had to submit a budget by the end of within 2 weeks with forecasts for the entire quarter. And it was extremely overwhelming. And every day I would go home, I would drive home, and I was absorbed in deep thought about how I was going to survive the next day. And I remember within those first 2 weeks, I was like, I'm going to give it 6 months. And if it doesn't work, I'm leaving. This is too stressful. And one day as I was absorbed in thought, I almost ran over a pedestrian. And I realized, no, there's got to be a better way to support people in becoming confident and capable managers and leaders. And so over the course of several years, I started to do my own little research and ask other leaders, other colleagues who were managers, and ask them what their experience was like. And unfortunately, they had similar experiences too. And so that's when I decided I wanted to pursue a PhD so I could actually devote a significant amount of time into researching this phenomenon to really understand how leaders learn and how we can support their development. And that's one of the reasons why I decided to start Sinogap Solutions, because I was so passionate about this. I decided to make this a full-time job for myself. So I wanted to ask you, so this is another think and share activity. I'd like you to take a moment to think about, how does someone learn to become a leader? What do you think? So you can reflect on your own experiences. And when you're ready, please share that in the group chat. So I'll give you about 30 seconds to think about that. And then I'll prompt you to start responding in the group chat. Or if you're ready, go ahead, start typing away. Okay, so Susan. And hi, Susan. I just saw your last name. Good to see you joined us today. Okay, so Susan said, I would like strategies to help encourage others, leadership in both formal and informal. Oh, sorry, I'm reading the same thing again. I apologize. Veronica said, observing others, excellent, trial and error. Sue said, by viewing what other leaders do and their own experience of being led, absolutely. Yes, you start to pick up the things that you admire and like, and the things that you're like, I'm sure we've all had leaders that we've admired, as I asked you to do in our transfer and activity, and the characteristics they possess. And there's also people we've observed that we're like, that we don't admire, we may actually be afraid of, that we don't want to role model those behaviors. Andrea said, learning from other leaders, good and bad, absolutely. And Lydia said, mentorship from leaders we admire, absolutely. Observation of others, okay, great, people we want to emulate. So Excellent. So what I'm hearing from you is that, yes, we tend to learn through others, which is excellent. There are two ways that we learn. One is through self-reflection around what we're good at and what we need to improve, what's working, what's not. And the other one is through and with others, like mentors and coaches and people we admire and observing them. But through my research, what I discovered was there really is this one size fits all approach to leadership development. And maybe you can relate to this. The majority of research that's been done on looking at how managers learn has really focused on formal training. And if you work in a big enough organization, so I used to work with the government of Alberta before I resigned to start Sinogap Solutions. And one of the things that, they're a large enough organization that they have their own training and development teams that put on supervisory certification programs and managerial development programs as well. And there are also other companies that may send people to the local university and the School of Business department to take some leadership and managerial courses. So the majority that we do take is through formal training, which is a very one-size-fits-all approach because we're not taking into consideration people's levels of confidence, past experience, and expertise. And so we may be a seasoned manager and we may be in a course with somebody who's been a manager for a couple of months. And so we have to try and get something out of that course that relates to both of us, regardless of what our experience is. But we also learn on the job. And many of you spoke about, like Allison and Lydia and Susan was saying, that it's our desire to do well, and from watching and observing other people is how we learn. And from my own research that I did, my participants actually shared some numbers, percentages with me. And I actually researched this in other studies as well. And apparently maybe you can relate to this in your own experience as well. We tend to learn how to be a leader. About 10% of it comes from on the job, and 10% of it comes from formal training, and 90% of it comes from on the job. So the majority of how we learn to be a leader comes from actual real world workplace experiences that are coming from our day-to-day tasks and duties. But yet we're not really maximizing that. And so today's webinar is really to look at how do we support that learning in the workplace. So before we go any further and talk about what managers are learning, I want to make the distinction between, well, really what is workplace learning and what is formal learning, because I see a lot of people using terms like workplace learning, and I don't necessarily agree that that is actual real workplace learning. So let's do a quick comparison. All right, so workplace learning is unstructured and opportunistic, whereas formal learning is structured with learning outcomes. So workplace learning occurs through the natural day-to-day duties of your job, and it's quite, opportunities will arise that you'll learn from. You're not always aware that you're learning from these opportunities, but those are the opportunities that may present themselves, like solving day-to-day problems that you encounter through everyday work. Whereas formal learning is structured in the sense where there's a beginning, there's a middle, there's an end, there's usually a teacher who's facilitating the content, and there's actual learning outcomes of things that you hope to achieve by the end of that experience. It also occurs workplace learning, going back to workplace learning, it occurs spontaneously, right? It's not structured like formal learning. You're not sitting down and planning when learning will occur. It just happens. Whereas formal learning can be a scheduled event, like a training program. Online learning, I've heard a lot of people using online learning in the sense of it being workplace learning, but to me it's still formal learning, because you have to schedule time to sit down and to learn from that experience. There's a beginning, middle, and end, and there are learning outcomes as well. So it's quite formalized. Workplace learning has also been referred to as informal learning, whereas formal learning has been referred to as training, workshops, conferences would fall under that as well. Okay. So why does training fail? Meaning, so why do we only transfer about 10% of what we learn from a course to the workplace? How come we're not able to absorb more and apply more of what we're learning to everyday work? Well, there's actually 4 stages of learning transfer. So there are 4 things that need to happen for someone to be able to transfer what they're learning to the workplace. And this is one of the reasons why we do struggle. And that's why it's only 10% of what we learn from formal training actually influences our performance. And so the four stages of learning transfer are, the number one is we have to actually think about when we're sitting down, we're getting training, like in that photo we have there in the classroom. You have to think about what knowledge are you acquiring from this training that you can actually retrieve when you go back into the workplace. So which knowledge and skills will you retrieve to apply to your everyday workplace? You also have to understand your workplace context and how the knowledge and skills that you're acquiring from training fit into that workplace context. Next, you have to identify the knowledge and skills that are actually relevant. As I mentioned before, you may be at an intermediate level and you may be sitting in a classroom with somebody who's quite a beginner. And not all of the knowledge or all of the content that's shared in that class or in that workshop or that conference will be meaningful and relevant to you. And so you have to stop and think about, well, what is relevant and how does that apply to my workplace, in a sense where you have to transform that knowledge to fit into your workplace context. Context is everything. We can't learn something devoid of the context. We always have to be thinking about our workplace and how what we're learning applies to that. And so unfortunately, we don't really, we may pay a little bit of attention to step 3 and really think about the knowledge that we're gaining, which pieces of knowledge that we're gaining are relevant, but we really don't pay any attention to stages 1, 2, or 4. We kind of take them for granted. And that's one of the reasons why we're only able to transfer 10% of what we learn in training to a workplace context. Now, I'm not saying we deplete our training budgets. We just have to be a bit more mindful of what we're learning in the training world and how it applies to our workplace context. And there's ways to do that, and I'll be sharing that with you. Okay, so from all of that research I did, I really wanted to understand how best to support learning in the workplace. So first we have to understand, well, what are managers learning in the workplace? And although I'm using the term managers, this, like we said, this could be applicable to people who are in informal leadership positions as well, because we're really talking about leadership competencies. So what are managers learning in the workplace? How are they learning that in the workplace? And what are the factors that either inhibit or enable learning to happen through everyday work? So we're going to actually go through each question, and through each question, I hope that you'll be able to get a better sense of the strategies that you can design to support leadership development through your everyday work. Okay, so what are managers learning? So they're learning 2 things: manager competencies and leadership competencies. Now, for the longest time, I thought they were one and the same. And as I did my research, I realized, no, they are very different. There are different skills and knowledge that you need. They complement each other, but they are different and separate. And we have to, there's risk in elevating one or the other, or assimilating the two, or thinking that being a manager and leader are the exact same thing, because there are different skills and knowledge that you need. So let's start with manager competency. So this will be a think and share activity. So I'm going to engage you a little bit now. I've done a lot of talking. What do you think are some of the knowledge and skills that are required under the term manager? What do you think? So take a moment to think about that. Give you a few seconds. And then when you're ready, go ahead and populate it into the group chat. Oh, I got a question about where you can access the information of here it is, the handout. So if you just click on that link, you can access the handout. Okay, so subject matter expertise. Thank you, James. Understanding the business and operational needs. Thank you, Lydia. Yeah, excellent. Anyone else? Okay. So there were 4 domains. I call them the 4 domains of manager competencies: leadership needs and emotional intelligence. Okay, thanks, Allison. And actually, that would actually go under leadership competencies. So save that, because we're going to talk about that in a moment. So I used to conflate the 2. I used to always think that manager and leadership were the same, as I was mentioning before, but we'll actually go through what the competencies are that emerged out of my data. So there were 4 domains. So the first one's systems thinking. And you may have heard of systems thinking. Peter Senge is a really well-known theorist in the world of systems thinking. And really, it's about understanding all the moving parts of an organization, and how if you make a decision in one area, how it can impact the other areas for better or for worse. And that's why we say collaboration is so important, and not working in silos. Because when leaders and managers and teams work in isolation, they could actually be making decisions that negatively impact other areas without even realizing it. But systems thinking isn't only about understanding the internal workings of your company and your organization. It's also understanding external factors like stakeholder or client needs, trends that are happening in your industry as well, and how to stay ahead of the trend, right? And how to stay continually stay agile and nimble to ensure that you're meeting your clients and your stakeholders' needs. The next one is controlling assets. And so Lydia talked about business and operational needs, and now we're getting into that a little bit more. And so assets like your budgets. Like I said, the first thing that I had to do was I had 2 weeks to come up with a forecasted budget for that quarter, and it was overwhelming. So you have to understand the dollars and how to allocate those dollars to achieve organizational goals. But assets are also your people. So understanding things like scheduling of staff, or who to assign to which projects and tasks. The next one is overseeing systems and processes. So these could be your HR policies, your IT systems, payroll, for example, or for example, a lot of companies now had to acquire remote working solutions to ensure that their teams were continuing to work together and collaborate. Those are your systems and processes. And also final, but not last but not least, achieving results. So you have to be able to leverage your current assets and understand your systems and processes and know how to maximize those and the people that work with you and your team to ensure that you're achieving the successful completion of goals and specified targets of each year. So as managers, we have to find ways to measure success so we can set new targets for performance every year. Now, the next one was, oh, you can't see the link. Let me post it again. Can you see the link now? I'm wondering why you can't see the link. And I will send you, no, okay. You can, I'll give you my email address, and then you can also, you can send me an email afterwards and I can send it to you as well. And actually I think I already do have your email address, but we'll connect afterwards. Okay, and Jamie, you can't see it either. I'm not sure why. Hold on. Let me, oh, 1 second. Now can you see it? Yes, okay, it was my bad, I apologize. Okay, wonderful, I apologize for that. Okay, so actually this, if you open this one, this should be, let's see, can't remember what page it's on, but I think it's on page 3 or 4 of your handout. This is also, all of this is in my book. So I really go into specifics in each of these within my book with some participant quotes to really bring to life some of these concepts or what we mean by systems thinking. And the participant quotes, actually, they do a really good job in making the concepts a little bit more practical and applicable. Okay. So leadership competencies, what do you think some of those are? And now if you've ever taken any of my other seminars, you'll know what falls under here. But what are some of the things that you think would fall under here? I'll give you a few moments to think about and then to type it in. And I'll give you a hint because Allison hinted to it. She nailed it actually. But what are some of the knowledge and skills you think would fall under there? Building relationships. Thank you, Lydia. Absolutely. Trust. Anything else? Understanding people, responding to their individual needs. Wonderful. Knowing your staff. Yeah, taking the time to get to know who they are. What are their needs? Them also on a personal level, right? Not just in the workplace. Where are they at? Where do they want to go? Investing in their professional development. I think that's a great question to ask your staff, right? Especially when you join a new team. Where are you at now? Where do you hope to go in the future? And how can I support you in that? Listening. I don't think we do that enough. Listening is really important to really understand what others need, and relationship building. Excellent. It's emotional intelligence. As I mentioned, Allison got it right. So it's all about emotional intelligence. So when I started to code and analyze the data for my participants, they actually, although they didn't say emotional intelligence, through their words that they shared, I was able to actually generate 4 categories, which were the 4 domains of emotional intelligence: people skills, Care and concern. Thanks, Susan. Yes. So self-awareness and self-management are the first two domains in emotional intelligence, which really speak to your ability to understand your emotions and be able to manage them. So one of my participants said, you need to know what you know, and you need to know what you don't know. And the only way you can do that is to seek feedback and input from others, not only from your mentors and coaches, but also from your direct reports and your colleagues and your supervisors, so you can continually grow. It's also okay to not be good at everything and to identify others that you can recruit onto your team or that you can develop that can possess some of the skills and the competencies that you don't have. And I think the higher up you go in leadership positions, being that technical expert isn't always as critical, but being able to motivate your staff who do have that technical expertise is critical, which leads us to social awareness. And so social awareness is like systems thinking, but with an emotional intelligence spin, if you will. Social awareness is understanding your organization's culture, the values, which are those unspoken norms, behaviors, right? Not necessarily the words that are written on the wall, but the actual behaviors that we engage in that are supposed to live those values. It's also about empathy and compassion. And many of you spoke about that in regards to traits that leaders that you admired possessed, right? So it's being able to be compassionate towards others' needs. And we talked about that. So knowing, like Sue said, knowing your staff and understanding who they are and where they're at, right? That's all about compassion and empathy as well, which then leads us to relationship building. And Lydia mentioned trusting relationships. And so you have to be able to develop trusting relationships with people by listening, right? As Catherine was saying, by getting to know who they are, what they need. Relationship building is about investing in other people's skills and wanting to help and support them in their development. It's also about things like managing conflict. And so some of the managers I spoke to said, you know, the technical aspect of the job wasn't what was hard. Although I think sometimes forecasting a budget within the first 2 weeks of a job can seem daunting. For me, and like for him, what was really harder was managing the team and the interpersonal relationships I found challenging at times. So being emotionally intelligent is critical. And there's a lot of research that talks about how the more emotionally intelligent you are as a leader can positively influence the people that you work with, can increase employee engagement by 30%. And engaged employees, can even be 20 to 30% more productive. And if you look at it from the aspect of emotional intelligence, it makes sense because you want to work with somebody who's compassionate. You want to work with somebody who makes the time to get to know who you are. You want to work with somebody who leverages your strengths and skills and asks for your input and feedback, right? That's what we find inspiring and motivating. And this is true for people who are in informal leadership positions too. I think the 4 domains of manager competencies and leadership competencies apply to people in informal leadership positions too, because you still have to work towards the successful achievement of results. You still have to understand how to leverage existing systems and processes, and you still have to be able to do that while developing trusting relationships with people and taking initiative as well. All right. So we're at the 30-minute mark. I'm going to see if we have any other questions. No, we don't have any questions. Okay, so I will continue. All right, so how do managers actually learn in the workplace? Okay, so we did a little bit of theory beginning. We're going to get more into the practical stuff now, which will lead us into the strategies quite nicely. So how do they learn? This is really what I wanted to understand. So first was all about understanding what is it that they're learning in terms of knowledge and skills, which we just covered, but how are they learning that? And so number one, they're actually learning it through being emotionally intelligent. So if you think about that, it makes sense because if you can't develop relationships with other people, no one will come and give you honest feedback. No one will support you. So one of the things that all of the managers had in my study, they all had access to a mentor, and usually more than one mentor. Someone who had their back, somebody who supported them, somebody who gave them positive, specific feedback around what they were doing well, but also told them where they needed to improve. And they also had such trusting relationships with their staff that their staff were able to go up to them and say, hey, when you did this, it didn't work out very well. Or when you said that to me, it impacted me in a negative way. And they felt like that really contributed to their self-awareness of where they needed to continually grow and improve. So being emotionally intelligent was one of the ways that they were able to learn. Another way was through everyday work processes. So now we're getting really into that 90%. Remember we talked about 10% comes from training, but 90% comes from everyday work. So these are the day-to-day work processes that we engage in, like solving problems, collaborating, consulting. Donald Schoen is a theorist, and he wrote this book called The Reflective Practitioner. And he said, managers have to function in the swampy lowland. He says, things are messy and dirty in the managerial leadership world because we don't have a playbook of preset solutions to problems that we're encountering. Sometimes we have to make decisions with very little information in ambiguity, which is, I'm sure you can relate to that, especially what we've been through, what we're going through with the pandemic, right? We're not sure, we don't have all the information that we need, but we still have to be able to make decisions, especially now that we're reintegrating back into the workplace. And how are we going to do that safely? How are we going to keep our employees safe? Are we going to ensure that they have what they need? So making decisions in this ambiguous world is the natural environment of many managers and leaders. But the thing is, we don't necessarily know that we're learning from these opportunities, and not all experience lends itself to learning. What improves the ability to learn from these work processes is self-reflection, making the time to sit and reflect on what worked and what didn't, so we can improve our performance the next time. And learning is great, but if it doesn't influence our performance for the better, then it was all for naught. And so being able to make time to reflect and get feedback from others goes a long way in enabling us to learn from these everyday work processes. So I'm giving you some hints around the strategies around how to support informal learning, which we'll get to in a moment. We also learn through learning processes. So learning processes are similar to work processes in the sense that they occur in everyday work. But we tend to be a little bit more aware that we're learning from these moments. So like self-reflection, which we get when we get feedback, temporary managerial positions, or any other kind of temporary position. Doesn't even have to be a managerial position, but there could be an opening because maybe somebody got a promotion or went to another organization, and now there's this short-term vacancy, and we have to replace that person quickly, and it's called replacement planning. And those opportunities, those positions give people opportunities to learn new skills, to see if they like the position, and to get feedback around how they're doing. And so they're critical in supporting workplace learning, because usually you get feedback. Hopefully you're getting feedback from your direct supervisor, if not from others as well, around how you're doing in that temporary position. And last but not least, learning activities. This is the 10% really. These are the workshops and the conferences that we go to. And we're still learning through those activities, although only roughly 10% what we're learning gets transferred to the workplace. But if we can maximize work processes and learning processes by making time for self-reflection and thinking about how what we're learning applies to those work processes and learning processes, it can go a long way to bumping up that 10% to maybe even 20, 30, 40% if we just make more time to self-reflect on that. Okay. Now, I just want to remind you, if you have any questions that are popping up for you, please, I'm checking the Q&A box from time to time. Please take the time to write your questions. Okay. Now, what are the factors that affect informal workplace learning or informal learning? They can be interchangeable. So I want you to think first, this is another activity, another think and share activity. What do you think are some enablers? What are some of the things that exist in everyday work to enable learning that occurs through work processes and through learning processes and learning activities? So take a moment to think about enablers that exist in a workplace, and then please start to write your answers in the group chat. Okay, so Susan said, hold on. Oh, Kelly said relationships, trust, documented processes. Okay. Novel situations, transparency, honesty. Okay. Business as usual mentality. Time to reflect. Are there certain things that happen through everyday work, certain mechanisms that exist that can be leveraged to support workplace learning? Okay, I'm going to go through some of them now. So the things that you're talking about, yes, I'm just going to actually put a title to them. So think about mentoring. So some organizations have a formal mentoring program, which is great. And then the question becomes how to leverage that to really support managers or people in new positions. And so access to mentors is critical, or coaches. I don't have coaches up there, but coaching too is also critical. Now, mentors can come in various different forms. It could be, I think all supervisors should be natural mentors, but it can also come from somebody in a different work unit as well. And I think what we need to do more of is to think about when somebody enters into a new position, whether it's formal or informal, like an onboarding program, for example, when somebody joins a new organization, are we assigning a buddy? Are we assigning a mentor? Somebody who maybe is even a colleague that they can ask questions to, somebody who can, you know, let them know about a little bit more around the climate, the culture, who's who, more than just, oh, here's the lunchroom and there's the bathroom, but a little bit more around, let me introduce you to other people. And so you can start to develop some connections. Yes, feedback loops, absolutely. A mentor can be great when it comes to feedback loops. So it's think about who else can be incorporated in those feedback loop processes. Another one is in participation in special committees. So especially for individuals who want to gain more leadership skills, participating in special committees or special projects is really critical. And that's one of the things that my participants talked about. Is before they even pursued a managerial position, they were actually invited to attend some of these committees. Sometimes they sought them out and took the initiative to say, oh, I know that we're putting together a special task force to implement a new IT system. I would love to be on that task force. I would love to be a certified trainer to train others on how to use the system. So if you think about it, you have to work with others to manage assets, right? To leverage systems and processes to achieve results while developing relationships and navigating through conflict, because that's usually a natural part of the process. So these really provide opportunities for people, and we need to think about how best to maximize those opportunities for people to gain the leadership skills that they need. Participation in social activities too. So a lot of the participants in my study gained access to leadership or those temporary positions I was talking about through social activities. So, and also they engaged in social activities when they needed time to renew their energy sources. So things like retreats, team building activities, or hockey tournaments, golf tournaments, lunches with the team. So when I was working with the government of Alberta, we used to do a lot of fun things over lunch. There was a Spanish class during lunch. There were singing choirs for Christmas carols as well, and things like that. So that can go a long way in helping to develop relationships to get a better sense of what the organization's culture is. And like I said, we learn with and through others. So the more relationships we have, the more people we can go to if we need support or if we have questions that need to be answered. Equitable access to temp positions. And so we'll get a little bit into this a bit more when we talk about strategies, but usually a lot of the experience that I have when it comes to replacing people quickly in these temporary positions, it's usually a tap on the shoulder. It's the people that we know. And I think we need to be a little bit more thoughtful around how to create a process that can give access to other people that we may not have considered that could be a good fit for that role. And because those positions really give people an opportunity to develop some new managerial leadership abilities and skills. And so we have to make an effort to make them more equitable. And slower paced work environments go a long way to support learning, as I mentioned. Now, I'm not saying that we have to slow work down completely, but you know, there's natural ebbs and flows in the workplace. And so how are we maximizing times that are not as crazy or as hectic or as busy? What are we doing to support self-reflection? And so although these are separate points, they're very much interrelated, because if we make time to meet with mentors and coaches, we get that opportunity to self-reflect. No problem. Thank you, Lydia. You're very welcome. Okay. What about some barriers? What do you think here's another think and share activity. What do you think are some barriers? Oh, what about teaching people how to self-reflect? Kelly, yes, thank you. Absolutely. So it's easy to say that, but how do you actually do that? Yeah, I guess it's a bit of a skill, right? So self-reflection can come from mentoring and coaching sessions, but it's also about taking time, maybe scheduling time in your calendar. I used to encourage my team to do that and say, what is reasonable for you? How often can you sit down and reflect on things that you're learning? I had somebody who was in it was a temporary position. It was solely to gain experience. And I said, we have to maximize the learning that you're getting out of it. So let's take a look at your calendar and see when we can put in some time for self-reflection and with some guided questions around things that were very specific to her job. But it could be even things like, what is one thing that you learned this week? What is one thing that you felt like didn't work out too well that you could do better? And what's one area that you'd like to get some feedback on? And these can, even little things like that can go a long way to support somebody in their self-reflection as well. Okay. Yeah, teaching people how to self-reflect, that could be a barrier. Yeah, so not making time for it, maybe, Kelly, is that what you mean? Not allowing people to take time for it as well could be a barrier. Anything else? Other barriers that you think could exist in a workplace that could prevent people from being able to learn leadership and managerial skills? Okay, I'll go through them. I'll go through them now. And if you're still typing, please go ahead and populate them. I'll refer to them. Okay, so one is basically what I'm going to go through is the antithesis of what the enablers are. So little to no access to mentors, right? And so I was talking with one company that didn't have a mentorship program, and they wanted to create one that was quite fluid and created stronger relationships between managers and their staff, and to teach managers the skills around how best to mentor. And so making sure that mentors that you have or that are accessible in your company are not just accessible to the select few that you've chosen to promote into leadership positions, but that you're making mentoring accessible for everybody. Also, exclusive access to committee work, special projects can also be a barrier. And so I've also worked in organizations where it was kind of who you knew got selected. And so thinking about how to make that equitable so people can maybe even say, hey, we have a new task force that's going to be established. Please submit a paragraph as to 1, why you want to be on this task force, 2, what you hope to learn from this, and 3, how it'll help you in your current position. Things like that can go a long way to help support, encourage others to self-identify to want to be on these special projects and committees. Access as well for women, yes, absolutely. And actually that leads me nicely, thank you, Kelly, to access to social activities. So one of the things I discovered as well is access to promotions happened mostly through access to social activities, right? It was on during the golf tournaments and the hockey tournaments that were mostly guys that were playing in the hockey tournaments. That's when the socializing happened, and that's when the opportunities were identified for promotion. But unfortunately, there weren't a lot of women that were at those events and activities, and therefore women didn't have the same access. And so you have to think about, how are we making these temporary positions accessible to everybody, so that it's not just the people that are going on these special activities, or the people that have been invited to participate in special project committee work, that are getting access to these opportunities as well. And by succession processes as well kind of leads nicely to that too. And so, yes, and as Kelly was saying, having someone supportive in a supervisory position. So that's also, I didn't talk about sponsors, but a sponsor is usually somebody who's in a higher up position, who has a lot of influence in the company, that can also speak on your behalf to support you. And I think as individuals, we need to be able to think about who we can reach out to and ask to be a sponsor. And as well as a company, how do we make sponsorship accessible for everyone as well? And actually in my book, in the last chapter, it's devoted to women in leadership, and it's called Women Up, Ignite the Leader in You. It's really, it's just focused on how to support women and the skills that women need to feel confident to seek out mentors and sponsors as well. Okay. So, oh, and constant connected work environments. That was the last thing that I wanted to mention too. So obviously, if we can sequence work in challenging and incremental ways, it can go a long way in supporting a manager. And so, for example, you don't, and this is true for everybody, you don't necessarily want to slap down a 100-page orientation binder on somebody's desk and say, here you go. And meanwhile, you have 5 jobs that you have to, or 5 projects that you have to achieve in the next quarter. Can be very overwhelming. So think about how to sequence work in a way that's challenging enough that can promote learning and allow time for self-reflection and access to mentors. Okay. So workplace learning strategies for managerial development. So this once again, although it's focused on managerial development, I believe that these strategies can also be applied to anybody who's new onboarding into your organization and people who are in formal leadership roles. And this is on page 6 in your handout as well. And I apologize that I wasn't making the link accessible earlier, and I hope you're able to access it now. Okay, so number 1, structured onboarding for managers. So in my book, actually, there is a chapter that's devoted to the recommendations for change and the strategies. And so in the book, I go more into each of the strategies as well. So structured onboarding for managers. Now, onboarding is the process of familiarizing an employee with the organization. It's about ensuring that they understand what the compliance rules are in terms of policies and practices, clarifying the roles and responsibilities, letting them know a little bit more about the culture and the values, and ensuring that they're getting connected with other people. And so a lot of organizations and companies have really strong onboarding programs for new employees, but not necessarily for managers, especially if there's an existing employee who gets promoted into a managerial position. It's kind of like, there's your desk, here are your new staff, have at her, right? And it can be very overwhelming. And so I remember I had a new boss that was going to start, and I actually created an onboarding program for her. And it was, she was coming from within the company, but she was also moving into a new work area. She wasn't familiar with our work area, our roles and responsibilities. And so I created a month-long onboarding program that wasn't wasn't even hard to put together. But I focused on those 4 C's, like the compliance, the clarification of roles and responsibilities, hers and ours, the culture and connection with her colleagues, with her supervisor, making time for one-on-ones with her direct reports, with her colleagues and her boss. And I think it went a long way in helping her develop a lot of confidence and to ease into her position and try to set her up for success and not failure. And Andrea was saying, yeah, focus on the industry. Yeah, that's good too. Yeah, to get to know a little bit more about your industry. Who are the clients that you're working with, or the stakeholders? What are some of the norms of that industry? What's some of the lingo that can go a long way in developing a manager's confidence? Number 2, yeah, leveraging replacement planning and succession management processes. So seeing those as opportunities for growth and development, not just as a, let's hurry up and get a body with a heartbeat in that position, and let's hurry up and fill it. But think of it as, let's think about all of the positions that we have and think about how best to fill them when we get vacancies, or maybe even thinking about some of the critical positions in your company, like that if a person was to leave and it was to become vacant, how best to structure that onboarding for that person that enters into that position so that they have all the knowledge and the tools that they need to succeed. Maximize mentoring. So we talked a lot about this already. So it could be as simple as, hey, we have a new person beginning. What can we do to support their development? Is there somebody that can be assigned to them in many ways to say, hey, this person's going to meet with you and be accessible to you definitely on the first day and throughout your first week, and even throughout the first month, somebody that you can meet with regularly, somebody you can talk to, somebody will help connect you with other people, somebody you can ask those dumb questions to. Goes a long way also in supporting somebody in becoming confident. And confidence goes a long way. If you don't have confidence, it becomes a lot harder to take risks and to try new things. And so having support from other people can actually go a long way. And then also, restructure the allocation of work to allow for self-reflection and collaboration with others. And so that's one of the things that I did with my new boss who was coming in, was to think about all of the work that she needed to do and how best to sequence it. So it wasn't just like within the first week, she got assigned a whole bunch of work, but that it was sequenced in a way that did set her up to succeed. I call that the Sherpa effect, right? A Sherpa is somebody who has to mountaineer through rigorous, tough terrain and has to carry a heavy load. And if we don't support that individual in gaining the skills that they need to climb up that mountain, it can be very daunting for them and can really set them up to fail. And so how best to support them so that they can look outward and pull other people in to support their development is important. Okay, so let's see if there's any questions. Okay, yes. Time, workload, difficult time. Yes, these are the barriers. Thank you, Susan. Yes. Okay. So really quickly, before we go into questions to see if there's any, one of the things I just wanted to share with you is, well, first I wanted to thank you for joining today. I really appreciate it. I'm hoping that you did get something out of today around some of the strategies that you can implement to support leadership development in your organization. My book, which is available on Amazon, Kindle, and Kobo, actually goes into a lot of the concepts that we just touched upon. In an hour, you don't get a lot of time to go into everything like the way you would love to, but a lot of those strategies really go into more depth. And I also illustrate the concepts with quotes and testimonial for my participants. If you're interested in really designing a workplace learning strategy, whether it's for managers or even technically skilled staff, right, in terms of the leadership skills that they may need, if you're interested in doing something like that and not sure exactly where to start, please feel free to send me an email. It's just to, if you want to just engage in a conversation, there's no cost to that whatsoever. If anything, it's a big value and a benefit to me because I get to make connections with other people. I get to learn about the different work that you do and how best that I may be able to support you. Even if it's just a couple of ideas, I'm hoping that it can go a long way in helping you start to develop a workplace learning strategy for your company. Also wanted to share that we also have programming around developing strong, cohesive teams. So as I mentioned before, one of the things that we specialize in is working with companies that are trying to find ways to re-engage their employees and give the managers the skills that their managers need to be confident and strong leaders. So we actually developed a program, and it's called Developing Cohesive Teams. And it's really ideal for either new teams that are forming together and want to develop more bonds, but also for existing teams that are wanting to increase more connectedness and productivity. And really the result is getting a better sense of what individual strengths are in the team and what the collective team strengths are that can be leveraged to increase productivity and collaboration and communication. And so if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that program, the link is there, but you can also send me an email and we can talk about it, because although it's an online program that you can just access, there's different ways to customize it also for your needs too. And then I have a newsletter. So if you're interested in, I send the newsletter out at least weekly. And if you want to stay up to date with some of the webinars or other initiatives that I'm going to be doing, or I have blog, I also blog as well. I usually have a blog that comes out bi-weekly. Just feel free to go to my website. You can scroll down to the footer and you can actually fill out the form to access my newsletter.